Hi, folks. Can you all hear me? Brilliant. All right, I'm just going to get this up and going. We will formally begin with our introduction at 10 a.m. Good to see a bunch of folks filtering in. All right, so I've made some announcements and we are going to do our introduction here. Hi, folks. My name is Keenan Taylor. I am a scientific illustrator and fantasy author. The setting of my literary work, Kaimere, as I'm sure many of you know, is a fictional planet. The native life of this planet, called magic by the people who live there, take life from Earth and set it free to evolve independently in this new context. Last year in December, I made a mockumentary called Ballad of Kahai as my last video of the year. It followed an uktan, a species of fictional megaraptoran, from his own hatching to the hatching of his first year of offspring. All that was a single episode sponsored by Connor. Now, that was a lot of fun and a lot of work to fit in a single episode. This year, I've spread it out over 5 chapters, each in a December Tuesday. Instead of an uktan, this year we will be following a Zentaur, top predator of the forests of the known world. The purpose of this live stream is to raise the budget. As it stands, the saga of Tenir'ha and Baru will follow a pair of siblings as they grow up in the forests of Arvel, the western continent. Unlike uktan, male and female Zentaur tend to lead much different lives, so having a lead of each means that I can cover a lot more ground. So far, I've raised just over $600 on top of the basic sponsorship by Connor, which means that I can fill in a lot more art. I would love to also follow a young titanosaur as a subplot, and I'll be looking at that as sort of a stretch goal. Now, there's no pressure to chip in. The episodes will happen, and I've already got quite a bit of the art for them. This is just a chance to raise the budget further. If you are able and interested, please either use Venmo at Tales of Kaimere or PayPal at the Illustrated Menagerie at gmail.com and send whatever you like. I also have a Patreon page if you would like to support the project overall. All of this information can be found down in the description. Without further ado, let's get to the questions. You don't have to donate to ask questions. I will strive to answer them all. Just know that I may not catch them all right away. Don't be afraid to ask again if your question was missed. It's nothing personal, but if yesterday's test run is any indication, the questions often come too fast for me to catch them all as they arrive. All right, and now we will get right into the questions. Does anyone have a query to kick us off? All right, first one is how do you come up with scientific names? So usually I don't think my dictionary is on hand actually. So I took Latin in middle school and I have studied a fair bit of ancient Greek on my own. Ancient Greek and Latin serve the foundation of a lot of scientific names, especially in the past few decades. There's been a push for dinosaurs in particular to have often names affiliated or derived from where they're from. And I've reflected a bit of that in Kaimere, where a majority of the names, the scientific names, are going to be derived from ancient Greek or Latin, but there are a few that have the dialect or language of whatever region this animal was either introduced to the assembly or where it's most abundant. You'll see a lot of animals with a Greek or Latin genus name, and then Picardiensis, Nacarensis, filling in, kind of indicating where it's from or a word from that language itself. So I would say where I come up with the names is primarily looking at drawing inspiration from Greek or Latin, but some regional languages as well. All right, so here's my question. How do you go about designing the endemic clades of Kaimere? And aside from them, does the first dynasty have other survivors? So for the endemic clades, there are 6 major ones, for those who don't know, which I covered in the first dynasty of Kaimere episode, which is with the first episode of this year, 2024. Wow. So how I went about developing them was taking a lot of inspiration from early reptiles, early stem mammals, taking a lot of inspiration from how did these early clades kind of diversify, because a lot of them had adaptive radiations to expand into different niches. So a lot of it was trying to figure out other ways that those adaptive radiations could have gone. Um, so as for how I came up with them, I mean, a lot of them are quite basal to begin with. The Carbasuchians, for example, are not dramatically different from a lot of large amphibians. So I would say how I came up with them was largely just exploring kind of alternate scenarios for familiar clades that they could have gone. Um, Sorry if that was not as direct an answer as you were hoping, but let's see. What animals from the failed harvest outside of the ones who managed to settle would have done well in Kaimere, like Smilodon, the American mastodon, and the short-faced bear? Um, That's hard to say. I think I mean, generally, my process is contextually driven. So I don't think there's many animals that wouldn't do well. Um, it really largely comes down to luck. I don't think there's anything about Smilodon that would have Smilodon gracilis, which was the one that was harvested. I don't think there's anything about them that would have. Uh, no, that would be Fatalis. Smilodon Fatalis. There's nothing in particular about them that I think would have given them an advantage over Megantarion. Um, so I don't know. I think if they were introduced at a point in time when there wasn't much competition, they would have done very well. The short-faced bear, if they were put in a place that didn't have a existing large bear or sloth, they would have done well. American mastodon, same situation. The mastodon in southern Arvel, I think, was extinct by that point, so they probably would have done quite well. Would have had some competition from Drenduga, Paleoloxodon, but um, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't. This might be not a very popular take, but I don't think there are very many prehistoric animals that are all that special. And by that I mean that would definitely succeed no matter what context they were put in. The things that succeed in Kaimere tend to do so because of luck. There's nothing about Mylodont sloths that is uh, particularly overwhelmingly successful against bears. I think if there were the case, they would be sloths today and not bears. But it just so happened that the context of the Great American Interchange favored stuff from North America as things were cooling, whereas in Kaimere, things were warming up at around the same time. And so the sloths just happen to have better luck with that. So I would hesitate to say that the things that failed would have done well inherently. It really just depends on the situation in which they're introduced, if that makes sense. Um, do Zentaur live in nuclear families like uktan? They do not. Males will often stick around. It really depends, and this is something I will cover in the episodes, especially the first episode, that it really depends on the health of the mother and the father and the productivity of the environment. Males ideally like to mate with several females, but they still participate with providing the mother with food while she is gravid. So they do often remain together until around hatching, which takes around 5 to 6 months. But then the male will leave. They don't take an active role in parenting like like uktan do. Um, so they do not form nuclear families. Are Megaraptorans based off any real family of dinosaurs? I don't think I've ever heard of them in real life. So Megaraptorans are a controversial clade of theropods. As I understand it, the consensus seems to be leaning toward them being very basal tyrannosauroids, so quite closely related to the ancestors of animals like T. rex and Albertosaurus. But there have been other studies that find them to be a bit more ancient to that. I think most agree that they're not carnosaurs anymore, which was a consensus back when I first learned about them. So Megaraptorans are a real clade of dinosaurs, but they are. We currently don't have a lot of really good material on them, so it is unknown exactly where they fall. As I understand it, I do know that there is work being done on several specimens, and that there might be some clarity in the near future. But I don't, I'm not in any inner circles. I don't know what the outcome of that would be. Not that I could tell you if it was under embargo anyway. But yes, so Megaraptorans and Kaimere are inspired by a real clade of dinosaurs. We just don't quite know exactly where they fall in the tree as of the moment. Have you ever thought about the future of Chimere's fauna? If so, would dinosaurs still remain the dominant megafauna? That I tend not to think very much about the future of Chimere, quite honestly. The purpose of the setting is a place for me to write my stories. Um, it's not something that I do too much work on beyond what I have, and like a lot of the stories are set between in the last few centuries or so. Um, would dinosaurs still remain the dominant megafauna? I think that entirely depends on the context of extinctions. I mean, anything comparable to what we saw at the end of the Mesozoic, I'm sure would impact them the same way. Um, Birds are pretty special, from what I understand, in how rapidly they grow up and how quickly they can lay eggs and hatch and move on to being independent. A lot of dinosaurs and Enantiornithian birds, from my understanding, is that they would, for example, take between 3 and 6 months to hatch. Whereas birds, some of them can take just a couple weeks. And so if there was a similar context where there was a huge competitive advantage in growing up quickly, I think the dinosaurs would be in a lot of trouble. Because that is not something that has changed. There haven't really been any chimeran dinosaur clades aside from birds that have accelerated that process. And that's something I really want to study more and dig into if and when I get an Enantiornithian bird episode to kind of explain a bit why modern birds are so much more successful. I think there were a lot of misconceptions early on that Enantiornithians and other early birds were maybe not as good flyers. There were a lot of other explanations explored, but as I understand it, the big competitive advantage of true birds, Neornithians, is through that kind of accelerated reproduction and growth. So would dinosaurs still remain the dominant megafauna? As long as their strategies continue to work, as long as things are fairly stable, I think they would continue to be the dominant megafauna. If there was a big upheaval, I think mammals stand a decent chance of following the trajectory we saw on Earth. What would Chimere look like in a couple million years with the tectonic plates similar to how Africa will merge with Europe and then make Pangea Ultima? I have explored kind of some informal movement of the continents in Chimere. For example, Arvel here is moving north, but Nakar here is moving in that direction. So there probably will be a collision since Arvel is moving a bit quicker. And Picardia is also moving north. So at least within the known world, there is likely to be a merging of the continents probably within the next 10, 15 million years. And that's going to obviously dramatically change a lot of things. The inland sea here is going to dry up. So all of that biodiversity and life that is currently thriving in this sort of golden age, a lot of seagrass grazers, which supports a lot of really big predators, that would all go away. And so if that were the case, the marine ecosystem would obviously have a huge upheaval if the continents were to merge. And then on a broader planetary scale, there's other changes that would happen, but that's kind of my focus, is on the known world. Can the portal reverse itself naturally, or does it require intervention? I'm curious if the portal in other planets pull life from Kaimere. So in its natural state, the portal's territory is just in the known world. And it has sent out satellites to a wide range of other planets. It currently has only drawn from Earth because that happens to be the one that is a closest match to it, to Kaimere's, atmosphere and gravity. And so it does not naturally send life from Kaimere to other planets. Now that the first children have altered the portal and its intervention so that they can travel to these other planets and come back, then it's entirely possible that if it were to break free of the contraption which controls it now, then I imagine that could dramatically alter how the portal works, because now it is coded to send back and forth. So that is, I think, the biggest implication of that is that if it breaks free, now that it has a connection back and forth, that could alter how the portal works. You've mentioned in the past that the genus Thanatobates has one other species other than the uktan and Chakukabawe. What is it, if it's still canon? It's still canon, but I haven't worked out many details of it, at least not. I struggle with these early concept things because if I go public with them, people think that these early works in progress are still canon, and I don't want to mislead them because they're all subject to change. So there is at least one other species in the uktan genus aside from the uktan and Chakukabawe planned. Will I follow through with that or just make it subspecies of the Chakukabawe? I'm not sure. How big were the titanosaurs that survived the dynastic extinction at the end of the Tyrant dynasty? They were small. They were probably around 5 to 10 tons. I think that oh gosh, I'm blanking on the clade name, but the Hercules Titan is an example of one of the other clades. The main clade that survived were the gardeners, like the Keratoderm here, which is the common Titan. I don't have art of the Heracles Titan here on hand. But they would have also been quite small. There were parts of Arvel parts of Kyrule that, due to the mountains and the currents, were somewhat isolated from a lot of the worst of the ash, and that would be where the titans of both clades survived, and that would also be where the large chasmosaurine, the elk drake, I think it's called. So there were quite a few large dinosaurs that kind of had refuge there, kind of in southeastern. Yeah. So the southeastern portion of the western peninsula of Kyrule is where there were a lot of those. It was a bit of a sanctuary, and so that's where they came from. Will we see more of the Chakukabawe soon? I quite like the animal. I do as well. I don't have any plans at the moment. The series I'm doing now with following um, the Megaraptorans, my plan is to cover the 7 main ones in the known world, but I'm in 6 or 7 years time I might expand, and if the series is doing well, um that might be a fun way to introduce Kyrule, because my plan is not to have it be a huge focal point in the novels. um so that would be a way for me to explore that. Is there any harvest? Oh goodness. All right. Sorry, I lost a chat. I wanted to ask, have Cenozoic squamates found any level of success outside the known world, or have Mesozoic squamates managed to keep them out? I would say that generally my plan is for Kyrule to predominantly be um, rhynchocephalians are occupying these lizard and snake niches we're used to. There probably are going to be some lizards and snakes. There already is a snake that I have canon over in Kyrule, the Dreamtime Serpent, I believe was the common name for that one. But for the most part, Kyrule is uh, a continent occupied mostly by rhynchocephalians. For those who don't know, rhynchocephalians are today only represented by the Tuatara. They're sort of, as basal squamates, they very much look like a lizard, but there's some pretty key phylogenetic differences between them. I believe there's also differences in behavior and anatomy, but to be perfectly honest, I don't know them. I haven't really studied that clade very much yet. It is on my agenda, though. All right. Are you going to a story of lions? That is not currently on my agenda. The Megaraptorans offer a pretty useful proxy for these stories because they travel far and they need to get familiar with all of the local game in their area. And so as I'm working on this Zentaur story, as they age up, it gives me an opportunity to show readers, in this first chapter that I just finished writing now, introducing a lot of lizards and small birds, and they just chased down a Hegetathir, which is a little notoungulate. And then as they age up in these 5 chapters, each is going to have a different swath of prey animals and competition. Right now, when our heroes are about 25 pounds, a common cockatrice is a huge threat. In the next chapter, common cockatrice is going to be a rival. In the 3rd chapter, a common cockatrice will be prey. And so that's part of why I really like the idea of using these Megaraptorans as a protagonist species for these documentaries, because it gives me a chance to show a very broad range. Whereas if I had a lion, they would really, while they were cubs, they would be vulnerable to a lot of things. Once they reached adulthood, they would have rivalries, but they would largely be an apex predator in terms of, maybe not the most dominant predator, because one lion versus 50 hyenas, that's not really a top predator, I would argue. But, they're not going to be as useful a proxy for me to show the diversity of a region as the Megaraptorans are. However, not all xenofiction stories that I write are going to be from that angle. This is just like this series and what I'm planning. So I certainly wouldn't write off the possibility of doing a lion story down the road. This new find of a Homotherium cub has certainly got my mind abuzz with ideas of a Homotherium xenofiction story, but it's not on the immediate horizon. If you had to pick a different theropod lineage to inherit Kaimere as the dominant predators aside from Megaraptorans, what group would you pick? I would also want one that's pretty small so that it can undergo a pretty diverse adaptive radiation. If I had it be tyrannosaurs, then especially if the protagonist group, if the apex group were T-Rex, well, then once they went extinct, I would need to switch to another clade. So I probably would want to go for something that is broadly small. I probably would go for some kind of ceratosaur. I think there's a lot of possibilities there. So that would probably be my pick, would be some kind of ceratosaur, something small, something fairly generalist. It would be interesting to see a line of ray fin fish, the convergently evolved humanoid mermaid body plan that lives in Kaimere's polar waters and acted like a mythical siren. That would be a lot of fun. I like the idea of exploring some of these mythical creatures that aren't all homunculi. You'll, I'm sure, note, like, for example, the griffins in the Permian Islands are not a demon. It's a natural creature. So I do like exploring that and having not every mythical creature in Kaimere be something magical. And a fish lineage would certainly be quite interesting. What lives in the polar continent? I have a lot of plans, but not a lot finalized. There's probably going to be some travel from the Permian continent. There's going to be a lot of stuff like aquatic animals from a wide range. You've got seals up there. You've got the draconiforms. I don't really know what I'm going to do as far as the dominant terrestrial fauna, because secondarily terrestrial animals from aquatic ancestors like seals and cetaceans, as far as I'm aware, the only precedent for something like that would be, as I understand it, snakes might have an aquatic ancestor, but I have not recently looked into that, so I don't know if that theory is still accepted. So I don't know. I have not finalized what is up on that continent yet. It is on the agenda, though. You've said other clades from outside of snakes filling the niche of legless animals outside the known world. Any plans to cover them and what they might be? As I said earlier, my plan is that rhynchocephalians are going to occupy a lot of these niches. I do have a legless rhynchocephalian clade or clades planned, but those are not. I haven't done any work yet on them other than the basic concept and a few sketches. But that is kind of my tentative plan for the snake and lizard niche of Kyrule. How do you go about choosing which clades survive and become dominant and which go extinct? I'm facing a lot of difficulty with my project's geologic time periods. So I found it very helpful to. Well, I will preface with some of them were locked in already. I knew that sloths were going to be successful because I decided early on when I first designed the map of Picardia when I was 12. I'm 32 now, so that would be 20 years ago. I knew that there were sloths. I knew that there were going to be quite a few animals that were already locked in. Now that I am developing new areas, my strategy is generally first figure out where a harvest is going to be, figure out what's still living there, and then see what niches might be competitive and viable for something to slip into. Generally, your smaller generalists are going to have an easier time being harvested and slotting in. Um, as for how do you choose which survive and which go extinct, I think go with the ones that excite you, quite honestly. But if you're trying to be really grounded, I think the strategy would be figure out, if you're doing something like Kaimere, where the harvests are triggered by extinction events and therefore opportunity for new animals to come in and occupy new niches. I think that would be your best bet, would be to pin down when are the opportunities for them to fill in niches. But at the end of the day, again, I think it's fair to do what excites you. But again, for a more grounded approach, I would go for trying to remember that not many animals are profoundly excellent in every possible scenario. Sloths are very successful in Kaimere today, but that is largely down to luck. They came in when there was a massive extinction event, and the context was very similar to where they were coming from. So I guess I would keep that in mind. You can kind of set the stage as you wish. So if you really like Thylacophilus and you want it to be successful, you can have an extinction event roughly coinciding to when that animal lived. And, once an animal is established in a habitat, it's very difficult. It's often very difficult for new animals to push them out. And so I think if you're having trouble with figuring out what clades are going to be successful, I think it might be easiest on you to go through and say, all right, randomly determining 5 major extinction events in the past 10 million years. Where are these going to be harvesting from? If I've taken out the top predator, this is an opportunity maybe for the top predator of this, or maybe your harvested top predator also goes extinct, and two meso predators, one native and one harvested, can duke it out, and you can have an adaptive rate of variation from there. That is something I've explored a variety of times and found success with it. So that is the angle I would approach that personally. Yes, I do think of the Smilodon species, Gracilis would definitely be the most likely to succeed. They're smaller, they're more flexible. As I understand it, they were pretty decent climbers. And so that gives them more opportunities to slot into a vacancy. A similar story played out with the cave lions, where the really big ones weren't able to spread far beyond the opportunity they had when there was a broadly vacant territory with lots of game in southern Arvel, whereas the smaller members of the cave lions were able to adapt and slot into a lot of niches further north. So I think that Smilodon gracilis would be a similar story. It's used to living with terror birds. It's used to taking on smaller prey, so it's got a lot more options. It's not going to draw as much ire from competition. I think that Smilodon gracilis would have done the best out of the Smilodon species. What are some creature designs or concept that you just sat back and like, oh yeah, I cooked? I mean, my mind currently goes to the titanosaurs. I'm really happy with their design. I'm making some amendments to their design, a little bit inspired by sturgeons, where they have um, a whole lot of armor when they're younger, and that gives them a means of defense from all of the small and mid-sized mammal predators that were not as much of a problem for titanosaurs. But as they grow, their armor becomes less and less important. So some of the very old titanosaurs that I'm working on for this saga are going to be, a lot of their armor is going to be subdermal. But I'm really quite fond of this kind of subadult look where they still have a lot of the armor for defense. So yeah, I would say that's probably the design that comes to mind as one that I'm most proud of. In your opinion, is Dryptosaurus a Megaraptoran? I don't think so. I have not studied Dryptosaurus very much. They were a contender for the ancestor of the Kaimere top predators for quite a while. I would say almost 10 years before I like found out about Megaraptorans and switched over to them. Um, but I don't believe that any phylogenetic study has linked Dryptosaurus to Megaraptorans. Do I know about C.M. Cosman's All Tomorrows? I I am not super familiar with it. I know of it. I've seen lots of art for it. It looks very interesting and exciting, but it's not a project that I've dived into particularly deeply. Um, oh wow, I'm getting some super chats. Oh, thank you so much. We've got Andrew, um, Dakota Raptor. Well, thank you so much, Dakota Raptor DK. Cheers! That's exciting. Thank you so much. Um, let's see. Are we ever going to get confirmed life forms on Earth that came from worlds, life forms on Kaimere that came from worlds other than Earth? I have a few plans, but none yet set in stone. The reason for that is that I want to develop the planet and its ecology before I develop the creatures on Kaimere that are from those other planets. So that is going to be my main reason for developing these other planets, is knowing. Um, but I fear that if I try to come up with a creature that would basically be um, skipping the vast pyramid below what makes that creature and Chimera from another planet possible. So yes, we are going to get confirmed life on Earth that came from other worlds. Broadly speaking, Earth life is closest because Earth is closest in atmosphere, gravity, what have you. But there are other planets that were harvested from, and while most of those animals went extinct, well, not animals, most of those organisms brought from other planets went extinct. There are a few that I plan on having. I just haven't. I first need to develop the whole planet's ecology before I can say. And it's not going to be on the level of development where I've been working on Kaimere for 20 years and still not done yet. It's going to be broad strokes. It's not going to be a fully developed ecology on these other planets that I'm drawing it from, um, but yes. So I do plan on introducing those. I just haven't yet. What religion is most dominant in Kaimere? That would be the imperial religion, mostly just because you get a huge tax break if you're a member of the imperial church, if you're an imperial citizen. And so even if people are multi-faith, they still are officially registered as imperial members of the imperial faith. So that would be the most dominant in Kaimere for sure. But you do have to account for the fact that most of the peoples in these two peninsulas in the south, especially the Sarid, are going to have their own religion, as are the Sheklat people up here. But broadly speaking, yes, that is the most dominant religion. Is the portal's dormancy stable or a little unstable? Right now, it's very stable because of the whistling door that keeps it in stasis. Normally, there's a little bit of instability because it will wake up and assess its territory and then go back to sleep. Whereas now, it'll go back to sleep or it harvests if things are looking poorly. But now it's always dormant unless someone opens the door. So it's very stable now. How would chimeras react to anime? I'm not particularly familiar with anime, but I think they would probably enjoy it. I mean, there's plenty of various art forms in Chimera, so the idea of moving pictures, essentially moving illustrations, I think would be very exciting to them. So yeah, I think most of them would like it. How much do pachycephalosaurs diversify in Kyrule? I have 3 broad clades planned, one of which got to very large proportions, possibly 2 of which got to very large proportions. We'll see. That's quite underdeveloped at this point. I've posted a few of the westernmost species that I think the assembly would have most contact with. But yes, so they've diversified quite a bit. They're a very successful clade. Unrelated, but why am I getting ads on Livestream? I thought I disabled that. Let me see. Sorry, folks. Let's see about. All right. I have now disabled ads, so you shouldn't get those interruptions anymore. Sorry about that. Do the Sulon, common cockatrice, and forest hyena niche partition just fine, despite similar niches, or does one group often have the advantage against the other? It really depends. They're certainly not harmonious, and they all do. These open forests are not, you know, a prairie where there's tons of open space. I mean, it's more open, largely because of this tree right here. making the soil inhospitable to a lot of other plants, and the titanosaur dung that kind of passes along, which I will cover in this first chapter. So there's some pretty fierce competition for this niche of cursorial predator in open forests. I would say, broadly speaking, the common cockatrice is the numerically dominant predator in that niche, followed by the Sulon and then the forest hyena. Forest hyenas are a lot more abundant in the forest of Nikar, pretty rare in Arvel. So I'd say usually the cockatrice has the advantage, just by numbers and niche flexibility. But they do all compete with each other. It is not a strictly partitioned situation, and there's individual variation and preference as well. So it is not a regimented niche partition, but there is some flexibility there. How devastating was the dynastic extinction 15 million years ago? At least within the known world, it wiped out in Arvel, at least in Eastern Arvel. Eastern Arvel and Southern Nikar, it wiped out a vast majority of things over like 5 pounds, maybe 10 pounds. But in Kairul, it was bad, but it was not as devastating. It was really just at the site of the lava flows in the known world that you saw the biggest impact. Other places, though, it had global consequences. It was not as bad as the Permian end extinction or the end Cretaceous extinction. Were there any creatures you wanted to include in Kaimere but couldn't for various reasons? None come to mind. I mean, I think in some cases, like the thylacine, I guess, is one that would come to mind, or Smilodon, where I think they're really exciting animals and there's some interesting opportunities that I could explore with them, but they just didn't line up well for a good opportunity. And after a certain point, I can't just include everything. So even though I really like Smilodon, I really like the thylacine, I think they're both fascinating in various ways. I didn't want to include everything. So so those are the two that come to mind that I didn't include, even though I really wanted to. But I did find a way for me to have something similar to Smilodon in the form of Meganterion, the Haraud. And I also have an animal very similar to the thylacine in Kairul that I've shown early art of and plan on expanding on further. So even though I don't have those animals specifically, I've made pretty close proxies, similar to the jaguar didn't line up, and that's my favorite of the big cats. But I made the red panther, which is, again, a pretty close analog. What inspired me to make Kaimere? Oh boy. It's something that was a culmination of a bunch of different inspirations. What was the original inception was when I was 12 years old, 20 years ago. There was a class where we were supposed to design a map of an island. It was supposed to teach us geography and cartography. And so I made that. I said it was an island that had elves and dinosaurs, and it was largely inspired by the Perry Reese map, in which I drew little animals all throughout it as kind of the inspiration for what I've got behind me there. So that would be the main inspiration for Kaimere. I would say I was also inspired by, as much as I love Dinotopia, I would say that's kind of the core of Kaimere's inspiration, is feeling like, well, I feel like it's a little weird that everything is locked in time, and yet he's also got unique species of each of these genera that have independently evolved, like the Quetzalcoatlus skybacks. And so just thinking like, well, what if there was a world in which there were a bunch of dinosaurs periodically brought in, and they just continued kind of the logical conclusion of that concept. I would say was very influential to me. Also, I really liked the Narnia books, and so I would say that was another inspiration for Kaimere, of this sort of hidden world with a lot of fantastical elements. So that's kind of how I would pitch Kaimere, is kind of a mix of Narnia and Dinotopia. Narnia had some interesting progression where you had a nation of peoples who were descended and developed from, I believe, 15th century Spanish explorers. It might have been 16th century. It's been a very long time since I've read those books. But yeah, so I would say that those three things, my own project of designing an island that at the time was in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle, of enjoying Dinotopia and enjoying Narnia, and kind of those three things kind of culminated in what you see behind me and why you're on this channel. Is it possible the first children still exist on other planets? I would not rule it out. What other species of giraffoids could we expect to see in Hyrule? Maybe some descendants of a copy or true giraffe. Very unlikely for those two specifically. Do have a lot of plans for giraffoids of the pronghorn variety to be present and very successful in Hyrule. Haven't designed many of them yet, only have kind of rough concepts down. I have an idea for a very, very large pronghorn. I mean, the two pronghorns on the Hausi Prairie are both of Hyrulean origin, so we'll have very close relatives there. Is Kaimere, having just started in the modern days, a new dynasty, given the ecosystems worldwide are now quite stable and no harvests occurring nowadays? I mean, the dynasties are a very subjective thing. It is because, like, even within a dynasty, there are often harvests within. And so, as I discussed in the Mesozoic dynasty episodes, it's not a term that has a strict diagnosis, if that makes sense. I think there's a fair argument to be made that once titanosaurs and megaraptorans became the respective dominant herbivores and carnivores around 12 million years ago, I think there's a fair argument to be made that that was the start of a new dynasty, a modern dynasty. But there were so many harvests in the interim that I think there's also a fair argument to say that no, we still have not reached a new dynasty. And I would be hesitant to say that this new current dynasty began when the portal was trapped, because there've been extinctions since the portal was trapped, and it hasn't been able to adapt and harvest. So it's yeah. Can you make a video on all the zoos in Kaimere? I have not. I think that would be a very interesting topic, and I think especially after the fieldwork episode, which is coming out at the end of this month, I think it would certainly be well worth exploring. I mean, that could be a whole series unto itself of the history of zoos in Kaimere, of modern zoos in Kaimere, of the assembly zoo that they have in Agathanosis, which is the assembly city in Rooster Crest Island, which is there. So I think there's definitely some opportunity to explore zoos and conservation and research in Kaimere. So it is something I would certainly be open to, but I haven't gotten any sponsors for it, and I have a lot of sponsored episodes that I need to catch up on before I can do too many unsponsored. Lizards aren't a real formal thing. That is not something I am qualified to discuss on. I have not studied squamates particularly extensively, so I don't know what the consensus is on that. I think that lizard is a very useful if nothing else, it is a useful informal term for squamates in general. Much like fish being not a strict diagnosable term as far as clades go, but it's still a useful common term. I don't know. Again, I'm not qualified to discuss squamates. I'm not qualified to discuss anything. I'm not a researcher, but I don't know very much about squamates. Given that Hyrule is dominated by gymnosperms, how is human civilization doing since I assume agriculture isn't as common there? That is a big hurdle that the civilizations that do exist in Hyrule need to overcome. Much like the known world, soil is often made quite difficult for reasons that will be evident in the next chapter. But basically, sauropods have a relationship with a group of conifers that make the soil allelopathic is the term, basically making the soil really unpleasant for competing plants. Now, that's not to say that the Titan Gardens are a monolith. There have been hundreds of different plants that have adapted to these conditions and are fine with more acidic soils on top of whatever toxins are deposited. But Hyrule has a lot of regions where the farmers need to be very diligent about rotating and even importing soil from regions that titanosaurs have not ruined. So it's present. There is agriculture in especially southern Hyrule, but it is something that they need to take into account. And partly in southern Hyrule is because sauropods tend to not do well in more temperate areas. They are present. There are sauropods doing very well in Picardia, for example. But if we're talking broad trends, it is something that you're going to find more easy access to agriculture in southern Hyrule because there's not as many sauropods soiling the soil. Are there any of the large neuronathids still alive? I have tentative plans for bringing in some of those. They won't be in the known world, but yes, I have tentatively planned for them in probably will be in Eastern Hyrule, but I'm not positive yet. That's still very early concept, and I try to avoid discussing early concepts too much because, again, I don't want to mislead people in thinking they're canon. And then I am often um, quite quick to get rid of concepts that don't fit. And then again, don't want to get people's hopes up too much. But yes, that is a tentative plan that I have. Seeing young Zentaur catching small animals will be a cool opportunity to draw lizards, rhynchocephalians, and other small things. Yes, I have quite a few plans, and that is a hope of this live stream, is to raise money either through super chats or through PayPal at the illustrated menagerie at gmail.com or through Venmo at Tales of Kaimere. It is my hope that through bolstering the budget of this series, I can design and illustrate a lot more smaller fauna in Kaimere that these little Megaraptorans will be hunting in this first chapter. So yeah, that if I would say that generally speaking, if there's something you would really like seen in this episode, that could be a fun thing to include in your memo in PayPal or Venmo, if you want to send some money and say like, hey, show me some rhynchocephalians. I don't know. That is something that's come up quite a bit in this chat, and so I've taken a note that seems to be of great interest. Yeah, I can think of a couple sequences right now. I just finished writing a chase of a Hegetothir, which is a small rabbit analog. Some of them are a little bit larger, so maybe hare is more appropriate. But quite a small little noto ungulate that are quite common in Arvel. I just bought book 1 on Kindle a few days ago, but I couldn't buy book 2. It is only in physical form. I do have plans on releasing ebooks of book 2. That was supposed to be something I did shortly after release. And I keep putting it off. My current plan is that when I release book 3, which is hopefully within the next couple months, we'll see how things go, to go back and also make a ebook version. The software that I used the first time around is no longer available. So it's just a matter of finding a new piece of software and getting familiar with it. So it is on the agenda. It is something I plan on doing, and I'm sorry that I have taken so long to do that. I've gotten a lot of queries about it, and I need to get on that. But yeah, so soon, hopefully within a few months, I will have ebooks for all 3 of my anthologies out. Will we ever get a video on the amphibians of Kaimere? I don't have a sponsor for it now, but I would not rule it out. Once as my channel grows and I get more people joining on Patreon, I plan on doing more series like I'm doing now. The assembly series does not have a singular sponsor, but I think it is good lore for folks to have who kind of get more involved in the project. And amphibians are a clade that I have on my roster of like down the road. I do plan on self-sponsoring that, but I also have, I think, 12 or 13 episodes right now that have been sponsored that I haven't done. So I need to prioritize those before I do too many other unsponsored topics. Have you ever thought about making a ballad of smaller predators like fossils or mesopredators? I think it'd be interesting to follow a predator that is an underdog for its whole life. I agree. Um, as I said earlier in the stream, I think that the Megaraptorans offer a good proxy for showing more of an ecosystem. And there's 7 species of, well, asterisk, 7 species of Megaraptoran in the known world that will cover all of the habitats to my off the top of my head, I believe. And so that is kind of my plan. And then once that series is done, maybe I'll go over to Kyrule, or maybe I'll start doing some other smaller predators. I also, one of the 7 anthologies that I have planned is a purely xenofiction anthology just from animal points of view. Would not be as large or ambitious as these ballads that I'm doing. But a for example, one of the xenofiction stories I have planned is from the perspective of a fox, and so that would kind of, I think, be more along the lines of what you're thinking of it, of a very small mesopredator, that instead of observing its whole ecosystem from the perspective of a growing top predator, it would be, here's all the dangers that a fox has to endure in Arvel. Will we see the Rukel in this saga? So for those who don't know, the Rukel is a large flightless parrot. It is a omnivore. I don't know. The Rukel is quite rare, and I am trying to have these sagas represent as average a life as I can. I mean, there's obviously no animal is perfectly average, no individual. Every animal is going to have unique quirks. In the Ballad of Kahai, for example, not every uktan knows how to deal with a Kelatar, these kind of large glyptodonts. And it's going to be a similar story in this one where, the male is going, the male Zentaur is going to be traveling to southern Arvel, and that's where it's going to meet the mammoths and the other residents of that kind of southern area of Arvel. Here, I need to get more familiar with with it. As for the Rukel, probably not. But I wouldn't rule out at this point. I mean, I am a discovery writer. I fill in a lot as I go. I don't plan a whole lot other than very basic beats. So if it comes to a point where I feel like that would be a good minor antagonist or something along those lines, I might include it. I certainly wouldn't rule it out, but it's not something that I'm planning on at this point. Do you have any plans for the North Polar Continent and Arctic Circle, and what kinds of fauna would be found there? I hate to be cagey, but nothing that I'm ready to go public with, other than to say that there will be marine mammals and stem mammals in the draconiform clade seals and whatnot that rest on their beaches, and tons of seabirds and pterosaurs. But I do have some endemic clades planned, but I have not yet developed them enough to go forward with them. It is something I plan on doing eventually, though. Are there any parasites that feed on the magic of creatures? Yes, absolutely. There are some strains of magic that are that feed on other types of magic. There's diseases that target magic, and have played a pivotal role in a few major events throughout Chimeran history. While Chimeran hereditary magic does afford them a lot of defense against a lot of diseases, there are some diseases that hit them harder than humans, in part because of the diseases targeting their magic. And there may be some animals that specialize in magic. They're going to be very small animals. I have a loose concept for a species of vampiric bat, for example, that targets magical things, but I didn't end up developing that in time for the bat episode. So I have a few concepts, but nothing really fleshed out at the moment. Are Starachonichids only restricted to Arvel, or did they have a much wider range? Same question goes for the Taroclade of Megaraptorans. So Starachonichids are a group of more basal Megaraptorans. The terrestrial ones are restricted to Arvel. The aquatic ones, including the Alar, which have as many as 3 species planned in the known world, possibly more. That's why I mentioned an asterisk about Megaraptoran species earlier. They have made it to Kyrule. They're quite successful over there. So terrestrial Starachonichids are restricted to Arvel. As for the Taro, which is the only true Megaraptorid Megaraptoran in Kaimere, in the known world, does have cousins in Kyrule as well. I think those are probably all going to be mesopredators or vassal predators, but that is not something I've finalized yet. If you do a xenofiction story with animal points of view, such as Ballad of Kahai and Zentaur Saga, would there be point of view of an herbivore instead of a predator? Yes, absolutely. I have a xenofiction story that I wrote from a deer's perspective. It's a very rough draft, but I probably will include it. I think there's a lot of really exciting opportunities to tell stories from proboscideans, given their higher intelligence. I think a mammoth story would be really fun to explore. If I raise quite a bit of budget from this live stream and its accompanying fundraiser, I plan on having a titanosaur be a point of view character for this coming thing. So that would be another herbivore point of view. Thescelosaurs, as I understand it, Thescelosaurs are among the dumbest dinosaurs, so it's not a story that I could really get into their head like I did for the Goliath story in my second anthology, following a hybrid orca blackfish. But there's, I could still follow it in kind of a mockumentary style. How would you do a manticore in Kaimere? So on the Permian Islands, I have an animal called a manticore, which is a stem mammal that has long quills on its tail, and the domesticated breeds often have a shortened face that kind of looks somewhat human. But I think there's I've seen a lot of really cool speculative options. I designed one for a friend's project that was a primate, a predatory primate. I saw a comment on, I believe it was a Twitter post from someone else who said that their project has manticore is their term in their project for saber-tooth cats. I think that's very fun and interesting. So I think there's a lot of options. The route I went is actually for an herbivore, um, but broadly speaking, it is very referential to um, kind of a very early account of manticores. That's generally my approach to um, animals named after enchanted creatures, is filtering it through the lens of someone who is not familiar with D&D or modern fantasy. These are being named by Victorians or older people who are referencing human folklore. Um, so my dragons have less to do with modern dragons and more referential to a lot of older dragons in mythology, which are often usually have ears, often are depicted more with poison than with poison or venom than with fire. A bit less reptilian than we're used to seeing, which is kind of the direction I took with my um, my dragons being stem mammals. Are there any quadrupedal theropods left? Yes. I will be giving them a feature at some point next year in an episode that's already been sponsored, but I have not gotten around to yet. Have you thought about making more projects like Ballad of Kahai in the future? Yes. Again, at the moment, I have 7 planned in total, one for each of the Megaraptorans. Um, but I really enjoy writing from animal points of view, and so I will likely be doing quite a few more of these. The unfortunate reality is that they are quite a bit more expensive than my usual episodes as far as budget goes, just because of how much art needs to go into them. Um, and so that's another thing where once the project brings in more money from ad revenue and from Patreon, um, I will likely start self-sponsoring a few smaller ones. Um, but at the moment, I'm quite restricted on time because I'm doing the episodes, I'm doing commissions, and I'm also trying to write a novel series and a anthology series. So there's it is something I plan on exploring more, but it is a big investment of time that I presently don't have a lot of. Um, but I really enjoy working on them. So my hope is to do more in the future. Um, how are monotremes doing in Kaimere outside of the ones already introduced? Would there be one descended from Cretaceous genera? Um, um, I have only the loosest plans for them outside of the known world beyond a very large alleged platypus from the northwestern jungles of Nikar, which is not a region I have explored very much. But for the most part, if they're present, they're going to be quite small. Why, for the now removed Cenozoic Miocene ocean harvest, the Pacific one, I removed those harvests because I had never really planned anything for them, and the portal is most concerned with its own territory, and the broader ocean is not really part of its territory. So why would it harvest from there? That was really just um, me kind of saying, oh well, what if I had a couple more? And so I threw in some extra harvests to fill it out, and that was so why did I remove them? Well, it's more that I never really developed plans for them. And so it's again, it's less why did I remove them and more I just chose not to add them. Um, if a fight happens between a Chaku Kabawe and a Titan Slayer, the Komu Kabawe, how would it go? For those who don't know, the Chaku Kabawe is a large Megaraptoran, and the Komu Kabawe is a large Dromaeosaur. Um, I think probably the Megaraptoran is going to have a tremendous weight advantage, and having more mass is a very significant advantage in a brawl. The Titan Slayers are very aggressive, so that's not for nothing. That having a lot of panache is really beneficial when animals confront each other. You know, I think I'm sure we've all seen the clips um, of cats chasing black bears away from a house. Um, because at the end of the day, animals don't know their own stats and they don't know the stats of their opponent. And so you don't know if something has venom, you know, and also just you might get spooked. So I think the context of this encounter matters quite a bit. But given that the Titan Slayer Kumu Kabawe are often extremely aggressive, um, and Megaraptorans generally prefer more of a display sort of confrontation rather than getting physical. I think the the chances that the Dromaeosaur might chase off the larger Megaraptor is certainly possible. Um, did the first children ever use megafauna like Hukogor or Zentaur in warfare? Yes, absolutely. Um, you usually have to do mind control magic on an animal when it's very small and young, because older animals often have a strong enough immune system that even the first children magic would have a hard time controlling it. Because again, if your immune system detects a foreign pathogen of some sort, it's going to fight back. And larger animals generally have much stronger immune systems. Um, so yes, they likely did, but it was not. Smaller animals are definitely favored for the reasons I mentioned. Has Kaimere always been a sci-fi seed world project, or did it start out as pure fantasy? If the latter, why and when did you make the switch? Um, it hasn't always been a seed world. When I first developed Picardia, it was a island in the Bermuda Triangle that still had dinosaurs on it, and those dinosaurs survived by being shielded from the asteroid impact by being in the Bermuda Triangle. Um, because reasons. I was 12. Come at me. But as the project developed, when did it become a seed world? Um, Probably a couple years later. I very quickly developed it from one island in the Bermuda Triangle to 5 or 6 islands. There was the Kenta Islands, there was the Kadjareth Island, the Chakati Island, the Colleen Island, and Picardia, and so I think it pretty quickly developed where it was like so many islands in the Bermuda Triangle that we don't know about that I was like, well, what if it was just another region, and then what if it was another world? So I would say it became a seed world similar to what we have today, where it was periodic harvests brought in animals and they developed on their own. uh, I would have a hard time assigning a date to that. I might be able to pin it down by looking through my old sketchbooks. It was definitely by the time I was in high school I had developed what is now the known world. um, Early high school, so that would be maybe 15 years, and so that would be I don't know, 2000, 8 maybe 2008. I would say is by then it was a seed world, as it were, um, which I know is very popular right now. But I mean, again, Narnia is and Dinotopia are basically seed world projects, and they were long before the current trend. I would argue. Um, Sadly, Smilodon's gracilis died way before the interrupted harvest. Yes, I got my Smilodon species mixed up. Um, do, 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 do. Um, you should live stream coloring that map. The map, I think, is gonna stay as is. I did consider like a very faint watercolor, but this map took me, gosh, I mean, I wasn't working on it for the entire month, but it was a lot of work. Getting glue that had the right amount of adherence was very difficult, and I would honestly be worried about coloring in this map and causing irreparable damage. Um, Outside of the polar forests, are there any surviving examples of aeroplankton biosphere, and has anyone sponsored an episode on it yet? I don't have any sponsors on it. I do plan on there being quite a bit of aeroplankton. Um, the forests of Kaishel are where it's most abundant. And man, did I have fun writing those sequences in a story that is now going to be in the fourth Tales of Kaimere anthology. But they are definitely going to be present throughout Kaimere. I would say that pretty much any dense forest is going to have some aeroplankton magic, some wild magic. Um, they are also probably going to keep this sequence in the Lost Hellfighter. In Picardia, in the Highlands, um, there are some wild magic swarms or aeroplankton. Um, do, 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 do. Are you going to redo some of the Silent Ones lore? I love your world building for this project, but the Silent Ones being damn near unkillable is my only gripe with Kaimere. So something I would say about the Morkid lot, the Silent Ones, is that I think it's important to remember that the lore I have presented has been given from the perspective of the Assembly. And so to their understanding, they've only encountered a few of them. It seemed overwhelming and overpowering. Um, it was only with larger caliber rifles that they were able to stop them. Um, but the reality is that they are part of um, the ecosystem. They are not able to single-handedly defeat anything in their environment. There are plenty of accounts of silent ones being slain by herbivores not much larger than them. The Kettlerak and the Mordu, respectively the big Oviraptorosaur and the Parasauropod in Kaishel, plenty capable of killing them. I appreciate if it feels that they are unkillable and overpowering, and that it might break your immersion. I would just implore you to remember that um, that it is not all entirely reliable narration. In the one that they faced in the second anthology that I have, the Morkut in that one was basically a prototype specimen that the first children were using to uh, experiment upon, and so it was a bit more enhanced than they usually are. Um, it is something that I intentionally am keeping kind of ambiguous. Um, in short, I'm not going to redo any of their lore. I would just say keep in mind that they are not quite as um, formidable as their reputation presents them to be. They are an animal that the assembly was told about by the indigenous people, who revere it as a demon, as a unkillable forest spirit that they have to um, kill it with all of these extra measures. And the reality is that there have been assembly agents who have killed them with rifles. So yeah, just keep in mind, I have no intention of redoing their lore. Just remember that the lore is not an entire reflection of the reality of their role in their local ecosystem. Um, do you think that proboscideans would have failed in Kaimere if the flora was far more dominated by angiosperms? I think they probably would have done a lot better if the uh, plant base was more to their favor. Um, yeah, I think they would have done much better. Will you ever do a video on the dragon clade, including dragons proper as well as Tiamat and such? Um, I'd certainly be open to it. I finally made a video for all of my Smogist sketches. I'd been hoping that that would come out around when the book is coming out, but at this point, I have just made a video with the Smogist um, drawings, and that's going to be coming out at the end of November. Um, but that again, that's just the sketches. It's not going to be, and then a few extra sketches and lore. That's but I do plan on making a Draconiforms episode at some point. Yes. Um, how are armadillos glyptodonts doing in Kaimere? We really only know about the Kelatar and the armored jackal. Broadly, yes, they're doing well. I don't think they're doing as well as sloths as far as species diversity go, but it might be kind of close. I mean, there's lots of opportunities for really small armadillos to be doing really well. I only have one other species of glyptodont I plan on exploring, and I don't even know if that one's going to be in the final run. Might just be the Kelatar. Um, but overall, I plan on having a lot of smaller armadillos doing quite well. Um, what kind of animals do you think were around in the Permian dynasty? I mean, there's definitely going to be a ton of diverse stem mammals. Um, but I don't have a lot of finalized stuff on that yet. I do have an episode on the Permian Dynasty has been sponsored, so that will come out next year. As for all that's in there, I have not finalized, and I don't want to make promises I won't end up keeping, or prevent. I don't want to close the door on anything just yet. How's that? Do Morcatlat have any natural predators in their region? The Oviraptorosaur Kettlereck cannon will eat them periodically. So that would be their main predator. Do you work on Kaimere with anyone else, or is it just you? It is just me. I often will. I have several dozen experts in various fields that I have approached for questions. Most recently, I did quite a bit of work with Dominic on um, from Wildlife Wire. He helped me a lot with the big cats, so that's an example. A lot of the experts I talk to don't want to be directly affiliated with the project, which I totally appreciate, because If you're a serious scholar, I appreciate that you want to be focused on legitimate study, but there have been some people who have offered me quite a bit of insight and help. But overall, yeah, I mean, I'm doing all the research, doing all the art. I have some people who have sent in some fan art do that makes great inclusions and filling out the episodes. But no, I don't have anyone else working with me, which is part of why I'm behind on everything. Uh, but I plan on making a Seed World collaborative project on Discord, with the concept being using other spec creators' creatures to make up the seeded life. I wanted to use some of yours. Is that okay? That's a tough one, because I do plan on having my novels be traditionally published. And as long as it is clear that your project is not, as long as you're not generating money off of it, as long as you're not presenting any of it as your own, I think it would be fine. But again, because I'm planning on traditionally publishing it with an agent and editor and publisher, that could dramatically alter a lot of copyright stuff, which is part of why I'm not working with anyone else. It certainly would make certain things easier, but having a property that is just tied to me is going to be a whole lot easier on the legal side of things. And so I'm fine with that. It's just going to be a fun collaborative project on Discord. I think that's fine. I have no issues with that. I would just keep in mind that ideally, eventually, Kaimere will be, a property with some sort of publication backing. And once that happens, things can get a little complicated, from what I understand. Hi, Curious, with the Megaraptors in every continent, why not the cold one? I wanted to explore a region without the Megaraptorans as the top predators. And so that's why I chose to have Kaishel be have the top predator be the Kettlerak, the large oviraptorosaur. I will be completely honest. Now that I've developed the Dilophosaurs more, I may have had them be the top predators instead. But at the end of the day, that would be a very similar aesthetic type of predator. So I don't regret not going with that. But yeah. As an ungulate enjoyer, I need more ungulate episodes, bovids, camelids, equids. Yes, there will be. There are some sponsored episodes that I think you will quite enjoy lined up for next year. Are there any burrowing turtle crocs in Kyrule? Yes, there are. What will happen if humans from Earth discover Kaimere? It is considered inevitable by most in the Assembly and most Chimerans directly working with the Assembly that we will eventually discover magic and Kaimere. What will happen is a big question. The Chimerans have made clear, as we'll discover in this month's episodes, that they will close the portal permanently if they are discovered. They don't plan on working with humans, trading with humans. They are terrified on an existential level that humans will run roughshod over them, because quite frankly, a single mercenary company could easily take over Kaimere with our modern technology. So it is something that is very concerning to Chimerans, and they will close the portal and just desperately hope that we don't find some means of opening it, which is entirely possible. So it's a very major source of concern for Chimerans and the Assembly, but it also is seen as kind of inevitable, unless we experience some sort of collapse real quick, which it is entirely possible that some in the Assembly and Chimerans are trying to make happen. Do you have any plans to include fan work? I've seen projects on DeviantArt similar to yours, choosing some fan art as integral parts of their work. Again, with the copyright issues and making Kaimere a traditionally published property, no. I am very flattered and very much enjoy fan art. I love seeing how different artists have interpreted some of my creatures. There was a series, I'm terrible, I don't remember what their username was, but someone did a bunch of versions of Chimere's sloths. And it was really interesting to see the different anatomical choices that they made. As I understand it, someone who is more familiar with sloth reconstruction than I am. So again, it's something I love seeing, but it's not something I ever plan on incorporating into formal canon until I have an agent who can talk me through the legal implications of all of that, because I could just see that being a very messy process if there's a lot of names tied to a property that I'm also trying to publish under just my name, if that makes sense. Can you make a 3-part Dino Bird documentary series about all 3 species of firebirds? Again, it's these take a tremendous amount of time. It is something, I mean, I would absolutely be down for those possibilities. But it all comes down to what sponsorships I get. Sponsors choose a lot of the topics, and what I feel like is going to paint the broadest picture of Kaimere, which again is part of why I chose the apex predators. I also chose them because I think they are something that is going to generate a lot of interest and excitement, both in myself and in a lot of viewers. Would be a good what if topic. I'm not sure what that was in reference to. Hey, Keenan, in one of the videos, you said that Chimerans see all feathered animals as birds. Do Chimerans also see all furred animals as mammals? Yes. So for Chimerans, they have, I mean, they're not English speaking, first of all, so they have their own terms for it, but the Assembly translates the Aminetran term for bird, that term as bird, and it encompasses pterosaurs and excludes some dinosaurs. Sauropods, for example, are not birds to Chimerans. Well, specifically to the Free States. They say that sauropods are not birds, but thescelosaurs are birds, even though from our modern phylogeny perspective, we Do not make that lumping. Parasaurs to us are very much outside of dinosaurs, but they have feathers. So I would argue that someone who is coming at it from the perspective of these are animals living around them, as opposed to our perspective where it was only recently that we even started calling the pycnofibers on pterosaurs feathers. And that's still contentious from what I understand. Did the first children's empire stretch across the entire planet of Kaimere, or was it restricted to the known world? They were actually mostly restricted to Kajar. They had outposts throughout the planet and throughout many planets, but they were very small, and they had made Kajar an extremely fertile land. They also had a very low and slow growth rate and population growth. So the Kajarth Peninsula, right above me there, actually had sufficient food for their population. So they did not, they probably had settlements throughout the planet. Maybe it was more than just research outposts. But from what the assembly has pieced together, it seems like that was really where that was the majority of their population was there in Kajar. Are there any unique crops that Chimerans have independently domesticated? Yes. I have not finalized a lot of them yet. I have a script that I started for a domesticated plants episode, and I did some research for, but I have not finished it yet. And a lot of that is subject to change. The map on the wall looks amazing. Thank you so much. This was a big thing that I was doing last year throughout this November, December time. And it's very helpful as I'm writing to look up and kind of use this scale bar here to estimate travel time. But I think more than anything else, it's I'm usually on the other side of my desk here when I'm writing, so I will look up and I will see look upon my works, ye mighty and despair, and it's very inspirational. It is. But yeah. Do you think Kaimere could work well for D&D or another TTRPG campaign setting? Yes, I do. I don't think it would work well for D&D. As I said in the test run yesterday, I think probably the most powerful witch or demon in Kaimere is going to be like a 5th level D&D character. It is a very low power magical setting. So I think that if I have a very rough draft of a role-playing system that I'm making for Kaimere. I am also considering reaching out to the makers of the Savage Worlds system and possibly collaborating with them. But again, this is all going to have to happen after I've published The Lost Hellfighter, have an agent, and can work out the legal machinations of that. If I don't get an agent, which is entirely possible, if I self-publish all of my books, that's a different story. Then I could do things much more on my own terms. But that is, I don't want to close that door just yet. But yes, I think Kaimere would be a very fun setting for role-playing games. I know there's actually quite a few people out there who have done kind of homebrew stuff. I even started a bestiary, a monster manual for Kaimere creatures in D&D 5e. I don't want to get too much into it, but let's just say it would be complicated for copyright. I ran into some problems that I didn't want to commit to. What is my favorite type of millipede? I am sorry, I don't know them well enough to have particular affection and knowledge of them. I do really like the really big ones. Um, at Cornell, they do an annual Insectapalooza, and I took my niece there last year. Time is meaningless. And they had some of those giant millipedes there, and those were really fun. She got a kick out of them. Um, Sorry, we're closing in on the end of the live stream, so I'm titanosaur xenofic. Yes, please. Heck yeah, $50. Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to speed run these here because I do need to start wrapping up. Kaimere dragons are some of my favorite spec dragons. Thank you so much. I really they went through so many revisions and changes and cutting and adaptation. I'm very happy with where they are now, but it was a long road to the modern design. Any sort of magic that places someone's mind into an animal after death? Absolutely. How would that work? That would probably, I mean, more or less it would function the way that the teleportation magic does, where it replicates your consciousness, your mind. I don't know how efficient that would be, but it's something that maybe could be tried. And I'm sure necromancers during the Age of Witches tried that quite a bit. Will we ever get an episode about the Crown of Hyrule? Yes, we will. I guess I should be cagier about that. There might be an episode next year that will be of interest to you. How's that? Any ape-like analog from adapiform primates in Hyrule? None planned, but I mean, I won't rule out the possibility of some of them losing their tails. It happened independently with macaques, so I don't think that would be too much of a stretch. Is the relic an endangered quite firm Drake, initially a Dicraeosaurid from Picardia, still planned but as a Parasauropod? Yes, but not in Picardia anymore, so it won't have that name. Oh boy, all right. I need to start. Are there any cursorial pack-hunted canids beside wolves and painted hounds in or beyond the known world? I have plans for some borophagines that are pack hunters in Hyrule. Imagine the first children encountering the first harvested skunk. That would be probably more of a bummer for them than a lot of the large predators. Is there a type of magic that places? Oh, I just answered that. Um, um, Would a dedicated episode listing all the recorded known harvest events that occurred in Kaimere's history be good? I think that would be a great episode. I think that would be a lot of fun. I think it would help clarify some things. However, the assembly doesn't know when exactly harvests, I mean, they don't know exactly when any harvest took place. It doesn't leave a fossil record. You kind of have to make inferences based on what other animals are showing up in the fossil record, and genetic studies can help illuminate some of that. But it's very difficult to make such inferences about when the harvest occurred past. There's a reason I've only portrayed the ones with specific dates past the dynastic extinction. But I would happily do kind of an overview of the ones that are known about and then speak in broader terms about earlier ones than that. Are we going to see more about the elephants of Kaimere? I don't have anything lined up, but I would not rule it out. Are the lunar olifants still alive anywhere? Yes, there's a very small population in Kyrule. Are there any surviving spinosaurs in the known world? No, but there may be a very unsatisfying asterisk on that, possibly down the road, depending on how some phylogenies shake out. Does the assembly have a plan for if Earth as a whole finds out about Kaimere? I talked a little bit about that earlier. The plan is, well, I've talked more about the Chimeran's plan, which is to shut down the portal. What is the assembly's plan? Varying opinions. Usually, it's trying to control the narrative, try to present magical beings in as positive a light as they can. If the silent ones aren't as OP, why is the entire continent and even all megafauna adapted to be silent against this species? If most animals can actually kill the silent ones, most animals cannot kill the silent ones. And it is also it is a broader trend than an actual forced silence. So even if, let's say, a given large species has a 10% chance of dying from the silent ones, over the course of a few generations, that's going to compound in selective pressure. So even if there's not a tremendous amount of direct danger, I'm thinking about the large elasmarians that live there, for example, that are like large enough to fight off one of the silent ones, but if a group of them were to show up, it would be a problem. They can still probably win against even like 2 or 3, but eventually they might get overrun, and those that do get overrun are not going to reproduce. So the silent ones aren't an omnipresent force, but they are an ecological influence that over time there is a selective pressure to be silent. If you look at the caribou, for example, they're doing extremely well right now, and they don't have that a general trend of silence that a lot of animals do, but it is happening to their population over time. Now, I think there's a fair argument to be made that they're still overpowered, and that's a fine opinion to have. I don't see it that way, but uh, uh, I won't deny that interpretation is valid. I just wanted to offer a little bit of clarity on. I think that I may have mispresented that. It is a trend of pressure towards silence that animals tend to evolve that way because it is a little bit of extra security, and a little bit of influence can have cascading effects over generations through natural selection. Um, Have I played Horizon Zero Dawn? It's pretty much Chimera but sci-fi. I have not. I really don't play video games. There's nothing against them. It's just a form of entertainment that's never really appealed to me. I did play a bit of Baldur's Gate, and that was a whole lot of fun. But that before that, I hadn't gamed in about a decade, so it's not really. I like role playing games. I have a regular D&D group and a regular group that does a variety of other different gaming systems. Some of which we may be going public with on another channel with. So stay tuned for that. Were dodos harvested? No. Um, do 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 do. How are rhinos doing in Kaimere? Better than I've gone public with, and that is something that will be expanded upon in future episodes. Are there Metalurian cats that live beyond the known world? Probably not. Sorry, I'm now just kind of trying to speed run and give as many answers as I can. Have you ever thought about what solar system Chimera is a part of, like how many planets there are? Yes, but as I discussed in yesterday's test stream, I developed quite a bit of their solar system, but I haven't finalized it yet, and I don't want to make any statements about that until I take time to study and finalize a lot of that lore. How dangerous would a Zentaur Kurajaku hybrid be? Probably. I imagine it'd be pretty dangerous, something that is comfortable on land and sea, but it probably wouldn't be as good on land as a Zentaur or as good in the water as Kurajaku, so maybe it would actually be terrible. I'm not sure. Do you allow fans of your books to write fan fiction in your setting? Yes, absolutely. Again, I'm not going to make any of that canon because of the copyright complications that I've discussed with my plans to hopefully seek a agent for my novels. But I have no intention of ever going after people for fan art or fan fiction. Certainly not. I would reserve copyright so that companies don't do anything with it. Not to put the cart 3 miles before the horse, but that would be the only reason I would enforce copyright. I have no issue with people doing fan art or fan fiction. What would happen if a Chimeran species set up a population on Earth, specifically the Morkatlot? It depends on the context. I think basically, I think a lot of animals in Kaimere would not do well on Earth because our ecosystem is extremely depleted. We don't have many areas that could support a Zentaur, for example. Morkatlot being able to go into stasis if they don't have enough food might do better than most Chimeran predators, but broadly speaking, Chimerans voted for Brexit. Pass it on. Yes, they did. Do you think the future there will be a book about biology and Chimere, like an encyclopedia? I absolutely intend to do something to that effect. I might do a series of field guides. I think that could be a lot of fun, of like field guide to Picardia, field guide to Arvel. Or I might do a broader bestiary of the known world. I've got a lot of plans, but again, gosh, it sure would be nice to do it with a agent and editor team so that I don't have to do all the formatting myself. Formatting is, broadly speaking, a bane of mine. So that would certainly be preferred, but it is something that if I don't get an agent for The Lost Hellfighter and I self-publish that, then a bestiary of the known world is something that I would do pretty shortly thereafter. Now that it got me thinking, as a last resort, would Kaimere dare attempt to just kill the portal hive so that humans could never invade? No Chimerans have the level of power needed to kill it at the moment. There may have been witches powerful enough to do it during the Age of Witches, but none exist at this time. That is certainly something that's been discussed, but at the best, they can contain it. And the assembly has not been allowed to study the portal, but from what they have pieced together, it seems like the Chimerans who control the portal now they aren't going to disclose this. They're not going to outright say it, but they don't have enough of an understanding of how it works to do much more than shut down the power so that it doesn't open. They're not in a position to kill it, but I mean that would be quite a useful last resort. Do you think, Keenan, I'm worried that people will think that my book series is too similar to yours, a ripoff, due to being seed world dinosaurs and biological magic? I wouldn't worry about that. I think at the end of the day, you're always going to find connections to things. If you read my books and follow my channel, you're going to notice inspiration from Narnia, from Dinotopia, from Star Wars to Lord of the Rings, Avatar: The Last Airbender. There's inspiration that I've taken from stories that I've enjoyed. I think that's kind of inevitable. Um, there's always going to be people who make snide comments. I guess I would just say I and I know this is hard. I try not to let it get to you, because if you're telling your stories, if you're making your creations, I'm sure it's very frustrating and annoying to get those comments, and it disheartening. Um, I would say I didn't go public with Kaimere for about I mean, I think it was maybe 16 years that I had been working on the project. I mean, not with the level of focus that I am now, because now it's my job, which is very exciting and helpful to be able to fully focus on it. Um, but as much as you can, I would say develop your project without going public with it. Um, there's a bit of a catch-22 that I've run into, that now I'm able to fund and focus on Kaimere as I'm developing it, but it's still in development. And I couldn't develop it as much as I have without going public with it. So I appreciate if that's a bit of a bind for you, but I would say do as much work on it before you go public, because if you go forward while it's still a very early concept and it feels very similar to what I or other creators are doing, you're going to get more of those comments than if you waited to develop and make it really your own, develop a style of presentation of your own, a project of your own. I think you'll get fewer of those. I certainly got a lot of comparisons to other stuff early on when I first came out with Kaimere. And so I think that's just something that's going to happen anytime you debut a project, is if it's got similarities to existing stuff, which every setting is going to have. And some of it you kind of want, you want to use comp titles, is something that a lot of publishers do, you know. Um, so I hope some of that was helpful. Um, Um, do I think that characters through 9 books will help separate it from Chimere, since it's not anthologies? Again, I think you're better off worrying less about formatting and more about making sure the setting is your own. Not to put too fine a point on it, but I am working on a novel series that will be coming out within the next couple years. So it's not just going to be anthologies. But yeah, make it your own, and you're gonna get comments like that, and they're gonna be frustrating. But as much as you can, try to um, tune them out and focus on making your story. Um, With your work on the Mesozoic dynasties, is the episode on the Jurassic Island still up to date? Are you planning on updating them? I don't. I wanted the Jurassic. I know that the Jurassic Islands disappointed a lot of people because it was things were quite familiar. But that was kind of the aesthetic that I was going for the Jurassic Islands. I wanted it to feel like a lost world, like a snapshot of the general vibes of um, kind of nothing exactly, maybe a bit uncanny is the word I'm looking for. An uncanny Jurassic, that broadly speaking, there's a lot of similarities. Um, but I wanted it to feel like a Jurassic setting, whereas the Permian Islands really don't. The Aborfeltharians are extremely derived and diverse. Same with the Permian Islands, that the Jurassic Islands did not, but that was intentional. So I don't plan on updating that. I might refine some of the designs once I start working on stories there. I think it'd be very fun to do a sort of homage um, to some of the Lost World type stories. Um, and so having, big lumbering sauropods and very reptilian theropods is something that I want to kind of lean into. So that was an intentional aesthetic choice. I don't think I'm going to be updating them all that much. Um, um, how and where could I submit fan art? Please send it to the to talesofkaimere@gmail.com. And I've got a log of fan art that I'm building up to include in relevant episodes. How different is our universe from the Kaimereverse? I saw in one of your posts on Twitter that Japan does not exist. So I'm trying to understand what makes this Earth different than ours. That was a joke. The free map that I downloaded to make the map for the harvests happened to not include Japan for whatever reason. And it's kind of become a recurring joke. But no, it is the same as our world. That is not true. Um, Japan is very much real. I've got a Japanese character in that is going to get a bit of a minor focus in next week's episode. So Japan is real. Sorry for any confusion there. So I've followed Kaimere for years, and I'm so happy to see where it's come. Thank you so much. I'm also I sometimes have to sit back and just get myself out of being so locked in, and I really appreciate the reception and enthusiasm that I've gotten for this project, and that this is my job. It has been a hobby that I try to cram where I can for so much of my life. Most of my 20s was spent working a variety of warehouse and retail jobs to pay off my student loans that I barely was able to do more than an occasional scene or creature illustration. That now that I can really fully focus on it is humbling and thrilling, and I'm very appreciative to all of you who have made it possible for me to do this. I really appreciate it. All right, gonna just scan down real quick and try to do these last few. Are there any other Tyrannosaurs besides Nehamu in Kaimere? There's probably going to be a couple smaller ones in Kyrule, maybe, but I'm not ready to commit to that. Quite frankly, I wish that I had put Nehamu in Kyrule. Its travel to Highlands of Arvel was a little weird. Now that I've filled in a lot of the natural history of Kaimere, but it's too late. So we play the hand we're dealt, and you know what? Sometimes it does feel like a little odd, but I also feel like it's kind of realistic. Like, for example, camels started out in North America, and only recently did they leave. And now we only have camels in Eurasia, Africa, and camelids in South America. So maybe it's not so weird. It's one of those things that I might have done something differently, but upon reflection, there is an element of tapirs also come to mind. So maybe it's more realistic that it is not where its ancestors were. Um, Kozman had similar advice: basically, keep your project to yourself until you have it in a presentable state. Yes, absolutely. But on the flip side of that, pursuant to what I said earlier, Kaimere would not be where it is today if I had not gone public with it and gotten enough interest and funding to solely focus on it. So if I had not gone public with it 5-6 years ago, whenever that happened, whenever I first got my Instagram page, I think that would be 6 years ago. If I had not done that, Chimera probably would still be in its very earliest stages of development. I might have done what a lot of authors have to do, which is you publish your books with an unfinished world, and you fill out whatever needs to be filled out for the sake of the narrative. And that's a perfectly valid and legitimate approach to it. I am just very thankful that these past 4 years, the past 2 years especially, Chimere has paid for itself enough that I can really focus on its development. Um, it would be great if I could have withheld Chimere until everything was done. I think it would be a lot less confusing for people, because I try to remind folks this is still a work in progress. There are still changes and refinements that I'm making. And it's only possible because of the generosity of the community I've built. So if you can keep it to yourself until you have it in a presentable state, I think that is, if you're able to do that, I think that's fantastic and helpful. And it will mean that your fans can just read the lore and it's set. But I also appreciate if you're like me, where you're not in a financial position to just not work for 5-6 years as you're in development. There's, in this economy, that's a big ask. So I think, if you can withhold it, great. But also, there's something to be said for kind of giving folks a peek behind the curtain. I know that there are some folks who get a little frustrated that the project is in development, but I think I get more comments of people who like to see kind of the work in progress, of the creatures as they're developing. I don't know. I certainly enjoy that I get to kind of get some feedback on it. I do wish to ask my good man on the subject of Seed World in general. How do you see chimera species fare in other settings of speculative projects such as Serena, Hamster's Paradise, and the like? So full disclosure, I avoid a lot of other speculative projects in the past 6 or so years that Chimera has been public. A lot of my process of creature development is taking inspiration from a whole bunch of places, putting it in a melting pot where, as I'm designing a creature, I will kind of refer back to it in my mind and take it out and unpack it. I do this with a lot of mythology and with a lot of extant and extinct animals. And I have a genuine concern that if I threw a bunch of other people's projects into that well of inspiration, that it could lead to inadvertent, maybe not quite plagiarism, but heavy derivation, which is fine. Being derivative is is not a terrible issue, but it is something that I am not looking into a lot of these projects until Kaimere is developed. Serena, I've heard, or Serena, I'm not quite sure how it's pronounced. Um, it looks phenomenal. I've heard amazing things about it. I'm looking forward to really devoting the time to diving into it. It is a Seed World project that I've heard so much excitement about, and I look forward to diving into it. But I haven't for intentional reasons. Especially when I first debuted Kaimere, it was the thing that I think I got the most comparison to, and that was a pretty big inspiration for me to distance myself from it so that I wouldn't um, get too much of that inspiration, if that makes sense. And then, like, once I had made that decision, then it just kind of became my default assumption. Um, I'm familiar with an author who he didn't watch Firefly until his uh, uh, space western project was done, for a similar reason. I think there's a lot of merit to exposing yourself to similar genres, so it's kind of a sticky situation. I read a lot of fantasy and science fiction, kind of with the knowledge that some of it's going to inspire me and excite me, and that will feed into my own work. So, what are you going to do? Um, do, 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 do. Um, what is the North Arctic continent like compared to Kaishel? As I've mentioned in some earlier comments, um, that it is something that I've got some early concepts for, but it is not something that I've finalized yet, and I don't want to finalize until I've made a bit more progress with that. Um, haven't been able to find a Hartsfield University in our world. You will not. It is. Um, I do make reference to real universities, but um, I have made a lot of the historical figures. There's a lot of historical figures that you have heard about in the episodes that I'm making that are inspired by real people in some aspects and elements, but I am intentionally not having real people and real associations um, be involved. Just it just seems wise to not and I also think it'll make for a more consistent canon. Like, if this is just something I'm doing for me, maybe it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But if it does become a copyright, a traditionally published property, that could lead to complications. um Hey, Keenan, do you think a Spec Evo project can have generous physics like T-Rex jumping across a canyon level generous to be good? Sure. I think that it's fine to be play fast and loose if it fits the tone of whatever project you're working on. I'm not gonna sit here and grumble about Star Wars playing fast and loose with some physics, because like it's only going to be jarring if it takes away from the tone you've set. So if you're doing a cartoon spec and you have, I think just, it's only going to be jarring if it takes out of the tone you're setting. I'll leave it at that. Are tapirs present in some capacity in Kaimere? Probably not. But we will unpack that in a future episode. Um, Do you plan on more ceratosaurs in Kaimere? I'd like to know more of them after meeting Weochituka. Yes, probably not the known world, though. I think there might be a relative of the Weochituka in Arvel, but that is with an asterisk pending. It would be cool if Kaimere had marine vipers. I'm not going to close that door, but I don't have any planned right now. Um, Also, I've been reading your stories, and you've definitely improved a lot. Yes, I have a lot of affection for my first anthology, but it is true that I am a jack of all trades approach to a lot of creativity, and some of my first stories were a little rough. Um, I have I feel like the newer ones are also going to be increasingly stronger, and my hope is that by the time I get to publishing my novel, it has I will be a veteran of the trade. Um, were there any thylacines harvested during the Sahul harvest? Yes, and they perished. Um, if an animated series or show were to be made of Kaimere, how would you like them to do it? I think probably I would want it to be more or less structured like my first anthology, where it was a bunch of smaller stories scattered throughout the known world to get people familiar with the setting. Um, do you plan on making videos of some of the wars that occurred in Kaimere? I don't have any sponsored or plans, um, but I certainly would be open to it. There's been um, a lot of military conflicts throughout Chimere's history that have shaped a lot of the political borders that we see today. Um, the latest April Fool's video reminds me a lot of certain Serenus species. The latest April Fool's one was the Snouters. Again, I don't know any of Serenus species, but a tribute to the Snouters would not surprise me from Dylan's project as well as mine. Are there any giant marsupials since they don't have a long gestation period of mammals? I don't remember the largest marsupial off the top of my head, but Earth had bigger ones. There are no Diprotodon, for example. Um, have you considered having Yi Chi in the universe? Yes, the early in pretty much right when that was announced, I redesigned Chimere's dragons to be belonging to that clade. Would Greenland be a good analog for a physical environment of the Arctic continent? Probably. It does have a circumpolar current, so it is colder than Kaishel for sure. Um, but mm, but it's I mean the planet is still quite a bit warmer than Earth, so I think Greenland is probably a decent proxy. Um, how can we be sure that you aren't a psyop to discredit anyone who finds out about Chimere? I think that would be a very effective way to keep Chimere hidden. Would be to present it um, as a fiction that should be dismissed as fantasy. I think that would work. Um, how does the assembly avoid conflict with the Asnarth? I feel like there would be difficulty considering the Asnarth power in the Free States and Roostercrest is leased by the Free States. So the Asnarth witch hunters are in Kajar, which are close allies of the Free States, but they are separate nations. They are both Kadanath people. They both share a religion, a lot of similarities in their language. Um, it is a problem. The assembly does not send if they send people to deal with the Kajareth, they will not send a witch or a vampire or a werewolf onto Kajareth soil or into Kajareth protectorates, because then the Asnarth would be, um, well, there could be some problems there, some diplomatic issues. So yes, the Asnareth and the Assembly don't work together. Um, compared to the allosaurs? Have Jurassic ceratosaurs and megalosaurs survived in Kaimere? Possibly. The top predators in the Jurassic Islands are of debated ancestry, and I intend to keep it kind of vague because I like the idea of. I think my current plan is the assembly's only been there once or twice, and not in an era in which they could do genetic studies for confirmation. And again, I like the idea of that being kind of a mysterious, unknown region. So I don't plan on clarifying that. By the way, I must ask, Fabodonts, are they edible? And if so, do they taste like frog? They're definitely edible. I don't know what they would taste like. I don't know enough about taste. I apologize. That probably would be similar to, as I understand it, a lot of animals' taste is more based on their own diet and lifestyle than by phylogeny. So it probably would taste similar to pig, I would expect. What is the best way to generally do a lost world? Oh, that's a tough one. I don't know. I mean, I feel like the best way to do it would be to set it in the late 1800s, early 1900s. I would say that it is a hard sell to have a modern Lost World. Possible, but a much easier earlier in our history. What was the inspiration for the cultures of Kaimere? The inspiration was my study of my anthropology degree at undergrad at SUNY Geneseo. By that point, Kaimere was already in basic development, and pretty much every class that I took in undergrad, unless it was a core requirement, was taken with the idea of how it might influence Kaimere. I took a lot of courses that would give me a broad understanding of peoples, and my goal has always been to make cultures in Kaimere that have that are not direct analogs. I don't have an Ottoman Empire. I don't have a Roman Empire. I don't have an Irish people or a Cherokee people. I really try to. I draw similarities in common denominators is a approach that I try to take. So if there is a cultural practice that people in temperate rainforests tend to do across the world, then I will usually apply it. The Picardiant, for example, they take inspiration from a lot of indigenous Americans, from indigenous peoples of New Zealand, and indigenous peoples of Great Britain. So they don't have, from the British Isles. So they don't have. It's not like that this is the Irish island, But there's a lot of similarities to them in kind of some broad strokes. But I intentionally try not to have them be analogous. So I would say that's my inspiration is trying to be as separated from real world cultures as I can. Yes, the Age, the demon kangaroo, Procoptodon. Yes, from what I remember, that's still the largest marsupial in the known world, and Kaimere overall. Do you plan on having large tyrannosaurs in the crown of Hyrule? I do not, but I won't rule it out just yet. Is the forest horse of Arvel still canon? Probably not. Probably not. It might be that design gets used in the equids of Hyrule. That's kind of my general approach to things that I make not canon, is I try to work them in somewhere else. But the languages means that the names change when I do that. What is up with the moose of the known world? I would honestly love a leopards or hyena style video going just how moose are able to tough it out and got larger. Yeah, moose are still doing well. They're probably more restricted to the below the kind of this hemisphere line than they were when I first did my deer episode. So they're still present. They're still doing great, but I think Picardia and the Southern Islands is where they're doing best. Any bear dogs beside the hedgeback? If they are, they're. I don't think so. I don't think so. Larger borophagians in Kyrule, certainly larger than the one in the known world, but not huge. Would you do a semi-aquatic horse like the Irish Kelpie? Wouldn't rule it out. I mean, there's certainly wetland opportunities in Kyrule. So maybe. Would you do a video on Fabodonts? I would certainly be open to it, yes. Codrath are a-holes. Yeah. No, I mean the citizens are broadly not, but they are a nation that wouldn't want to paint them with too broad a brush, but yes, they have imperialist tendencies that kind of do make them a-holes. I appreciate the censorship there so that I don't have to edit in post. Are there kobolds, goblins, or orcs in Kaimere? I saw that you were inspired by the elves from classic fantasies to create the Chimerans. There's going to be analogs. I think I am planning on having there be some kind of goblin, kobold, gnome analog homunculi that pair with the Maku. I'm not sure how that's going to go, though. I haven't done a whole lot of work on them yet. I can see how the Chakati Empire might be inspired by nomadic cultures like the Huns and Mongols. Yes, again, you know, I have taken inspiration from the Lakota, from the Mongols, from, you know, there's certainly similarities in a lot of Chimeran cultures, but I try not to be too direct in my inspiration, if that makes sense. How does the portal in Kaimere articulate in physics? I'm going to take the easy way out and say the assembly doesn't know. They have some ideas, but they don't know. Because I'm now 40 minutes past my deadline. I need to start wrapping up. Sorry. Remember, there were two species of Pocoptodon. One was smaller that was planned. Both are still canon. Yes. Seeing how far things have come, I do ask, will we get more stories and anecdotes of creatures from Kaimere getting through the portal and spying legends on our world? Yes, I have one, maybe two stories planned for my assembly-focused anthology that are going to be discussing some of the inspirations in our folklore that came from homunculi and possibly creatures that got through the portal. What if the portal glitched and dumped a million healthy, robust earth trees that got outcompeted? The portal doesn't really glitch, but it certainly has taken plenty of flora as well as fauna, and many of these are doing quite well. Yeah, moose sometimes wander into Chimeran settlements, yes. What is your favorite clade you've made up? Probably the Firebirds is the one that comes to mind. Although I really like the Fabodonts. I'm having a lot of fun expanding upon them. There's obviously human and elf equivalents in Kaimere, but will you ever make a dwarf equivalent? The first children were way smaller and way more advanced. So the Telmead people are, broadly speaking, I mean, like when I was first developing Kaimere, it was the people of the Telmead Mountains up here. So the Trist, the Kubmatir, and the Bolundikir. They're shorter. They tend to have big beards, and that was a homage to early in Kaimere we're talking like 15, 16 years ago, those were my dwarves. So they're still inspired by them, broadly speaking. All right, so I am going to call it here. This went really well. I had a lot of fun with it. I think probably I will do some of these in the future. So again, this has been a fundraiser for the ballad of the Saga of Tenir'ha and Baru, which will follow a pair of young Zentaur. If you would like to support this project, please consider joining me over on Patreon. That has been a huge benefit in getting this project off the ground, and I'm very thankful for them. If you are interested in adding to the budget of this mockumentary that I'm making, super chats are good. Also, the PayPal, the Illustrated Menagerie at gmail.com, or Venmo at Tales of Kaimere. Both of those are going to be in the description below. And you can include in the memo that you would like this to go to a certain creature if you like. But broadly speaking, this fundraiser has been to build up a budget to make more art and possibly a couple extra subplots in this series. Thank you all so much for joining. I appreciate it very much. I hope you all enjoy the episodes that I've got coming along, and I will see you on Tuesday. Cheers, folks.